I'm standing here in San Diego, and right behind me, as you can see, Tijuana. And this whole border crisis debate, there is one constant, and those are the people on the front lines, the men and women dealing with the crisis at the border. The law enforcement agents often caught right smack in the middle between governmental policy and humanitarian aid. We're talking about the Customs and Border Protection agents who at times see and witness the very worst here at the border, the criminal element, but also they're often the first to interact with migrant families desperate for a better life. So just how difficult is their job? Well, we spent the day with them along the border at Southern California. When President Trump talks about his big, beautiful wall, maybe he's thinking about this. This is where the 14-mile-long fence near San Diego begins. The giant iron gate slicing into the Pacific Ocean and separating Mexico and California. People gawk through the fence to the other side where a Border Patrol car sits, a warning or reminder to anyone who wants to come through. The fence stretches from Imperial Beach to Otay Mountain. We are driving along the 14-mile stretch with Vince Pirro. He's been with the Customs and Border Protection for almost 9 years.
All right, here we go.
We leave the highly protected border office.
A27 Alpha 31.
A27.
And come right up on the border wall and secondary border wall.
In the last 3 years, we've seen over 1,700 cuts in this secondary wall. All those U-shapes and cuts and the squares, the patches, are repairs to this wall.
The secondary wall is one of the walls that Trump claims he's building, but really, it's just being replaced.
This one is going to be replaced. We thought it would make it harder for them to climb, but what we found out is that they would still climb up and they would just stay on top and they would rock us, throw rocks from the top when we would try to come and apprehend them. So if you see to my left right here, that's the old landing mat wall right there. That was surplus material from the Vietnam era. It was used for helicopter pilots so they can land in the rice paddies. And then over to the right of that wall is the new bollard style. If you notice, one of the main things that you can't see through that wall. With that new primary wall, you can see right through it, which gives us more safety and security. It can be a very dangerous job. I mean, just not long ago, they shot at us from the south side, from Mexico. They hit the agent's vehicle. 2 shots hit, only inches away from the agent. So we deal with this on a daily basis. That's why we encourage people to actually go to the ports of entry.
We stopped midway for Agent Pirro to explain how the wall has changed the border. You were showing me something that just to give an idea of how things have changed.
Yeah.
You said around there, how many years ago was a completely different scene than what we see today?
Yeah, if you see today, it looks pretty tranquil. There's nobody outside. There's nobody running through rampant. Back then in the 80s and 90s, people used to congregate on this side. There used to be hundreds of people.
After about 30 minutes, we pull up to the end of the wall in Otay Mountain. The border security system, including this wall, wasn't designed in the last couple of years. It actually goes back decades. But back then, the principal reason was to keep single Mexican men out that, as experts say, were coming into the country looking for work. Fast forward to today. The populations that are trying to come into the States are largely families and often unaccompanied minors fleeing for their safety. Here, we catch up with Sector Chief Rodney Scott, who oversees the entire area. Chief Scott, thank you, first of all, for the time. In a short window that we've had here on both sides of the border, the one thing that I think we all agreed is it's a much more complicated issue than if you just pick up a remote and watch on TV, or you'll hear the respective politician put into a soundbite. You've been here for 27 years. Is it as complicated for you, given all the competing, both agendas, policies, realities, as it really seems to be from just our experience on both sides of the border?
First, thank you for highlighting that. Border security is very complicated. It is very challenging. That really, at the end of the day, border security is simply about law and order. And a lot of times in the public dialogue, when they focus on one microcosm of border security, say immigration or just narcotics, and you don't talk about literally it's just like your home, And border security, in a very simplistic way, we expect people to come to our front door, announce their entry. That's the ports of entry. Border Patrol's job is kind of simple. We're just supposed to prevent anyone and everyone from crossing in between the ports of entry, which are anywhere other than the front door. So you can make it simple, but when you start talking about the threats from terrorism to narcotics, to IPR, intellectual property rights, to immigration, and whether it's criminal aliens coming across or asylum seekers, you have to talk about all of it. When you talk about only one little aspect of it, it doesn't do it justice.
I imagine your job spec in your teams has changed as well, where you're not just dealing with border enforcement, but you're dealing in many ways with a humanitarian crisis.
The U.S. Border Patrol was designed and built, and when I say built, I mean the infrastructure, the actual buildings, the holding, processing facilities, even our vehicles, to deal with adults, and primarily adult males, but single adults. And now my agents are having to convert, they're dealing with entire family groups. There's a lot more challenges with that. The processing is an issue, the babysitting, even getting child seats in vehicles so that we can safely transport people from remote areas, which means that agent's not in the field. When you get overwhelmed with a number of 10 or 15 people, several different languages on that shift, all of a sudden the agents on the border that should be patrolling, they're not there anymore. That creates a vulnerability. It only took a couple weeks for the smugglers, the transnational criminal organizations, to figure that out. And now they're using these asylum seekers that are willing to walk up to an agent and surrender. They're using those to overwhelm my agents, pull them out of areas, and then smuggle the real commodity, whatever their higher value commodity is, whether it's people or narcotics, in right behind it.
For the most part, the majority of Americans say we need to have laws. You can't just have an open border in this country. But I defy a lot of them, if they saw the kids that we met at some of these shelters, kids younger than my daughter's age, that walk away and say, to heck with these kids.
So you're really touching the heart and soul of the humanitarian crisis now. That's all mixed in with this national security crisis, but my agents don't leave their humanity at home. I'm a father. I see the same things and I have compassion. The things that we see and know, though, that I don't think the average American realizes is I don't even know that those kids belong to that family. We don't have a good systematic legal way to guarantee that that child that's being brought across really belongs to that family. Now, I know for a fact many do, but how do we sort that out?
We asked Chief Scott about the policy of separating families.
You mentioned we operate exactly like other law enforcement agencies do. When we make an arrest, we have to decide, are we going to go, with us, we decide, are we going administratively? Are you going to process this administratively, meaning immigration side only, or going to be processed criminally? Anybody that we prosecute, that we're going to prosecute criminally, they don't get to take their kids to jail with them. Just like if you got arrested back home by your local police department for anything and there was no one there to take care of your children, they would go to Child Protective Services, or they could go to another family member. We do the same thing.
But the idea that we don't have accounting of how many, where they are, et cetera, that's not even a policy issue. That's just an organizational, structural one. And that I found people on both sides of the political aisle say, what gives here? We're America. This is the greatest country on the earth. We should at least be able to keep accounting of where these people are or how many they are.
So the United States Border Patrol can tell you every single person we arrested, every single time that we arrested a family group and decided to prosecute someone, and that we turned that child over to the legitimate legal government agency responsible, which would be Health and Human Services. Past that, it's outside of my
totally
scope.
Understand. This is the end of the fence here, but it seems like, Chief, this is only the beginning of the challenge. I'm hearing terms like fentanyl. I'm hearing countries that we never even talked about. I gotta imagine, if anything keeps you up at night, it's that you got bigger challenges ahead than even the ones you're dealing with.
Correct, but the one thing that keeps me awake at night is I spent 5 years when CBP was first formed focusing on nothing but terrorism issues and the terrorism threats to this nation. Terrorists, people that want to do real harm to this country, use the exact same smuggling infrastructure, the same smugglers that the Central Americans do, that the Mexican migrants do. That is a business to get something from point A to point B. And we're getting so caught up in this discussion about Central Americans and asylum seekers and all these other issues, we're losing the fact that mixed in there, maybe small numbers, but very high threat potential, there's a lot of other threats. And when I have a city like this that's expanding faster than I can build out my infrastructure, and I know I'm getting overwhelmed, I do see the pendulum swinging in a direction that I don't necessarily feel comfortable with.
To get perspective, we spoke with Vicente Calderon, who is our guide on this trip. He's a Tijuana native and a longtime journalist in San Diego as well as Mexico.
The American public, in the sense that they want border control, but there's also the fact that they are using this as the boogeyman. The border is like some idea that will save you for all the evil coming from out of the country, and it's not realistic, in the sense that the type of people that we are seeing are, in most of the cases, not dangerous people, and just families like the ones you see in any other country, including the U.S. If they just open their minds and go and look beyond the rhetoric, they will have more compassion and understanding for these people. When you use the term migrants in general, it's difficult to humanize that, because that's an entity,
Yes.
a migrant, an illegal
Or a caravan,
alien,
yeah.
or the caravans. And it's easier to put labels on it. Again, I give you that not all are good, not everybody there is a saint, but most of the people is good.
I'm here in San Ysidro, the busiest land border crossing in the world. And if you listen to the president, you'd never know, but it's actually, as his own DEA says, at legal border crossings like this where the vast majority of illegal drugs come into the U.S., not smuggled in by migrants. In fact, when you look at the mass of cars crossing, it's likely that at least one of them is loaded with drugs. It is true that once the San Diego wall went up, illegal crossings in the area went down dramatically. But what also happened is the crossings increased beyond the wall, in areas that were harsher and more difficult to cross. People kept crossing. The only difference is many more died. Next, how the immigration crisis is affecting U.S. border cities like San Diego, and how Californians and others are helping out where the government is not.